Gibraltar, cradle of history. Those are the words visitors can see carved in a commemorative monument as they enter the rock across the airport's runway. Throughout the years, numerous experts and researchers have revealed the countless secrets that for centuries had been kept hidden within the rock's interior and subsoil. Treading into Gibraltar's history implies moving along a path where the most ancient myths, the most exciting legends, and the veracity of equally exciting historical facts get intertwined. Since ancient times, the rock's evocative shapes have been considered home to gods and goddesses, and the scene for mythological epic poems. Among the latter, the most widely known is perhaps the one that sees in the rock's imposing morphology the remains of one of the pillars on which Hercules leaned to separate Europe from Africa. The current speculations about the existence of the most astounding means for electronic warfare in the rock's base, the testimonies of those who assert there is a secret nuclear submarine base inside the rock, or the recurring allusion to a mysterious tunnel that supposedly joins Gibraltar and Africa under the strait, only contribute to refresh the special connection among myth, legend, and reality upon which Gibraltar's history is built. The World War II period is no stranger to these components. Quite the opposite. The amazing stories about spies and saboteurs, General Sikorsky's mysterious death, or the secret plans to seize the rock, constitute such a fertile field that many times it poses a real challenge to researchers to distinguish between historical facts and stories that do not go beyond the sphere of myths or legends. But sometimes there is the wonderful experience of finding a veracity element behind what, until then, had been considered nothing but a legend. That was the case of one of the most curious stories which occurred during the last big military conflict. We're talking about Stay Behind Cave, a mission where, if Gibraltar was occupied by the Wehrmacht, a group of British soldiers would remain hidden in a molehill in order to report all the enemy movements in the surroundings of the strategic base. The secret around the whole matter, and the security requirements that marked the Cold War period, contributed to erase the trace of the Stay Behind Cave story, and to make it gradually appear to be doomed to enlarge the collection of thrilling legends that ornate Gibraltar. Nevertheless, the rumours that vehemently supported the veracity of the story kept alive the interest of Gibraltarian researchers, who for many years developed a prodigious tracing activity aimed at proving that Stay Behind Cave was more than just a legend.
Rumours of Operation Tracer, of course, were just that. In post-war Gibraltar, where a local community would talk about rumours of a secret chamber. And of course it was 1997 when the Gibraltar Caving Group finally discovered it. Well, officially discovered it. Other rumours suggested that army personnel had used it as an operational post during operations during the 70s, but not realising its actual significance. However, in 1997, Gibraltar Caving Group did make the official discovery, and a survey was done. And of course it was the scene of one of the most top secret missions of World War II. Operation Tracer, of course, was the official name for the mission. Locally it was referred to as Stay Behind Cave, more as an affectionate term.
I first heard of Operation Tracer on arrival in Gibraltar in 1989, and I heard it from a local historian and a good friend of mine, Tito Vallejo, who talked about these Stay Behind Caves. It also mentioned, and we'd spoke about two-man operations called Operation Monkey. Intrigued by what these were, I started to do a little digging of my own to find out a little more on the history side of what Operation Monkey or Operation Tracer was. The cave has been visited on a number of occasions by other people. I know several people that have been in there but didn't understand what they were in. The Gibraltar Caving Group, I believe, were the guys who actually realised the significance of what they'd walked into, and that they'd stumbled across Operation Tracer Cave, or as they've named it, the Stay Behind Cave. Tracer was so secretive that only the team and the shadow team that is referred to would have known that Operation Tracer was going in.
Nobody knew where this site was. He conducted many searches around Gibraltar looking for this elusive place, which we knew had been designed for troops to stay buried alive, to spy on the enemy, if Gibraltar had fallen to the Germans. He called it Operation Monkey, but then it was renamed Operation Stay Behind and eventually Operation Tracer.
After formulating various theories about the cave's possible location and overcoming the difficulties of moving within a closed access area that was property of the British Ministry of Defence, and consequently subject to understandable restrictions, the enthusiasts of this matter spent almost 2 unsuccessful decades trying to determine the cave's emplacement. But since those who seek the impossible are rewarded by the gods, in December 1996, after coming across an unexpected gust of wind, some members of the Gibraltar Caving Group discovered, almost by chance, a mysterious chamber camouflaged behind the tunnel wall near Lord Airy's battery. They enlarged the original hole on the outer wall and finally got access to a complex of chambers which had remained closed for more than half a century. They immediately came to the conclusion that they had found irrefutable evidence that Stay Behind Cave, far from being a war legend, was a tangible reality. This complex of chambers was soon declared Area of Archaeological Interest, and although still the property of the British Ministry of Defence, it is currently being researched under the Gibraltar Museum's responsibility. The supporting documentation of the story was soon found among the files of the National Archives in Kew Gardens, England, more specifically in the collection related to the British Naval Intelligence, documents that had been declassified as a result of the new Freedom of Information Act in Britain. The story could be finally rounded out thanks to the work of the researchers Jim Crone, Peter Jackson and Martin Noosa, who were able to get in touch with the only living protagonist of the story, a veteran medical officer of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve called W.A. Bruce Cooper, who, despite being 92 years old, had the memories of that event etched in his mind. Thanks to these scholars' and researchers' perseverance, it could be finally proved how much truth lay behind the story, a new version of the Trojan horse, a version full of finesse and heroism set in Gibraltar. A story that, after half a century, had come to us under the evocative popular name of Stay Behind Cave. The idea of setting up an advanced observation post in case the colony fell into the hands of the Germans aroused the interest of the British Naval Intelligence by the end of the summer of 1941. This was a specific moment of the conflict. It happened just a few months after the beginning of the Russian campaign. And what is even more curious, it was a moment in which the risk of Spain going to war, and therefore letting the Wehrmacht go through the peninsula and seize the rock, had stopped being imminent since the previous winter. At that time, more than half a year had passed by since Hitler had called off the arrangements for the so-called Operation Felix, because it was impossible for him to implement it without hampering what he considered the real Third Reich conquering war, the invasion of the Soviet Union. In the early part of that summer, the German divisions had attacked Russia in search of the desired Lebensraum, the vital place in the vast eastern lands. This was a strategic bet, which is supported from the very writing of Mein Kampf in the 30s, and which had made the Führer hold out hope of a new world order, one where Germany could provide for their basic needs and the continent, while leaving the control of the overseas territories to Great Britain, its potential ally. But for Germany, defeating the Soviet Union meant much more than finishing off its main ideological opponent. It was also a way to convince the British of their defeat and strip them of their little hope of victory. Besides, if the German blitzkrieg victory in the east was combined with a greater submarine and aerial pressure against the British naval traffic, the British might even consider the possibility to negotiate a retreat earlier than expected. As the first movements of Operation Barbarossa started developing, the idea of an impending defeat of the Soviet Union began to gain ground. In view of the huge devastation, the millions of captured prisoners, and the fierce German advance, it was difficult to imagine a different ending to this new lightning campaign than the Wehrmacht's victory. However, the splendid initial victories at Operation Barbarossa did not take their toll on the will of resistance of the British, who, relying on their empire and on American support, would remain firm even if that meant shedding more blood, sweat and tears. By the end of the summer of 1941, The battles where Bialystok, Minsk and Smolensk were annihilated had already taken place. Kiev was about to fall. Leningrad was besieged, and the Wehrmacht was already preparing the assault on Moscow. At that time, many people from both camps were convinced that the Soviet military power was on the verge of being devastated. Within the British naval means, people were confident that if the German forces repeated the success of their previous campaigns, the Third Reich's attention and military power would soon turn to the Mediterranean once again. It's a well-known fact that in order to control the traffic across the Mediterranean, it was pivotal to take possession of the three key strategic points of the theatre of operations. Those were Alexandria, its eastern entrance, Gibraltar, its western entrance, and that kind of traffic officer located at the very heart of the sea, the island of Malta. Since February 1941, the Germans had been supporting the Italian deployment in Libya, sending units that were later known as Africa Corps, which were commanded by General Erwin Rommel. These units had helped the Italians avoid collapsing after the last British counter-offensive that had finished with the loss of the important Tobruk harbour. But during the summer, in Africa, the Axis powers, spurred on by German support, had managed to get back into the game and even expel the British from Cyrenaica. With the foreseeable Russian defeat, enough forces would be released not only to help Rommel reach Alexandria, but also to reactivate the suspended Operation Felix against Gibraltar. And who could assure that this time Franco's cautious reluctance would not end up buried by the euphoria of the great victory over the Bolshevik? If the Africa Corps managed to capture Alexandria and Gibraltar fell to the Wehrmacht's assault units, Malta would also end up succumbing to the Italo-German naval and aerial pressure. Thus, in the autumn of 1941, the possibilities of Great Britain being expelled from the Mediterranean were so palpable that the British naval intelligence began to seriously consider a way of gathering reliable information about the naval traffic across the Mediterranean once the whole theatre of operations had fallen into enemy hands. It was basically this necessity which led the British Department of Naval Intelligence to conceive the so-called Operation Tracer. In short,